Ooh, ghosts, October, Halloween, spooky. Guys, I'm gonna level with you. I'm not a scary games kind of guy. It's really just not my thing. I get scared at things in games when you're not even supposed to get scared. Despite my username being Ghost Boy, if I see a game that has ghosts or zombies or evil demons in it, unless it's an RPG game or in a cartoonish style, I'm not touching that thing. Every once in a while I'll maybe watch a let's play or a speedrun of a horror game, but if I'm on my own, very rarely will I ever play or watch something that's main purpose is to scare you. So when I heard of Murdered Soul Suspect, I thought, oh, okay, well, it's probably scary, but the idea of playing as a ghost and trying to solve your own murder is kinda cool. I loved LA Noire, which had come out 3 years prior, and I had an itching to play more detective crime-solving games. I then proceeded to delay playing the game for literal years. Now, if you're familiar with the game, you're probably thinking something like,
Ghost Boy, Murdered Soul Suspect isn't even that scary.
And you're probably right, but I didn't know that. And like I said, jump scares, horror, screaming demon girls, not really my thing. Even when I played through the game for this video, it was only in the light of day, and when other people were home, and I generally had a podcast playing on my phone with the game volume turned down. Anyway, moving on from how scared I am all the time. The game was sitting in my Steam inventory from a Humble Bundle and I decided, hey, why not? Let's go for it. And I just found myself confused. It felt like they were really onto something great, but the compromises they made in other departments just made everything feel out of place. And I'm not the only one to think this. Only a month after Soul Suspect came out did the company that created Airtight Games close its doors. So I want to look back at the game and what I believe had so much potential and maybe what could have been. First off, I'm not a game developer. I don't know how to make a game, and I would never insult someone who has made a game or imply that I could do it better, because there are more factors than just sitting down with an idea. I don't know the story of the development of this game, and I won't be going into it, so if that's what you're looking for, I'm sorry. What I want to focus on is what the game ended up being, and maybe a few things where it had potential, but it didn't quite hit its mark. The other thing I want to say is that Murdered Soul Suspect is not a bad game. If you're watching this video, you've played the game before, and you genuinely enjoy it, that's completely okay, and there's no need for you to have to justify that. I myself actually enjoyed the game both times I played it, but there was just something missing. If you look up any review of the game, the one common word you'll see scattered throughout is potential. So let's break down the game into story and gameplay. We'll talk about what they did, if it worked or not, and alternate ways that they maybe could have done it. I'm going to go just through the story first, and then we'll break down every gameplay mechanic. Our setting, the City of Salem in the state of Massachusetts. Historically, Salem is associated with the witch trials in the late 1600s, where people were accused of practicing witchcraft and a few were even killed. The city, both in real life and in game, gets a large part of its identity from these trials, and they play a huge factor in the story. We start with the preface of a serial killer on the loose, known by the name of the Bell Killer, who leaves a drawing of a bell at every crime scene or sometimes on the victim himself. We meet the protagonist of the game, Ronan O'Connor, as he's being pushed out of a window by said Bell Killer, and his life flashes before his eyes. His tattoos tell the story of his life. From being bullied as a young kid, he turned to a life of crime.
You're under arrest for the assault and battery of Vincent Coulter.
Guilty on 2 counts of grand theft auto.
Until he met his wife, Julia. Julia's brother, Rex, who's a police officer, didn't want her sister marrying a criminal and gives Ronan a job within the department after hiding his criminal records away. However, a few years before the events of the game, Julia is killed trying to break up a fight.
Stay with me, you hear me? Julia.
Meanwhile, Baxter discovered Ronan's criminal past and threatens to blackmail him, but Rex intervenes, demoting Baxter. We then see how Ronan died, going in alone to pursue the Bell Killer despite being told not to.
I didn't know better. So you actually want to die.
No.
Ronan realizes that he's dead and tries to get back into his body, but the killer returns to shoot several more bullets into him, finishing him off for good. A bright light consumes Ronan's vision, and walking towards it, he is reunited with Julia. She tells Ronan that he's basically in purgatory, that ghosts persist in the world when they have unresolved issues, and that until Ronan can discover the identity of his killer, aka the Bell Killer, he will be stuck. It's also implied that there's some sort of time limit on this, and that if he doesn't catch the killer, he'll be stuck forever, but it's never really gone into further detail.
Julia, you left me once and it destroyed me. Please don't leave me again.
We'll see each other again, love. Just save yourself.
No, Julia! Don't leave me, Julia!
Ronan wanders down an alleyway chasing a ghost girl, Abigail, who explains how the world of ghosts work. Every ghost has a gift, and that gift reflects what skills you have when you were alive. Because Ronan was a detective in life, it's safe to assume his gift has something to do with this.
Your strengths in life are stronger in death. They become powers here. Some powers unique, some common. Possession, influencing people, manipulating the more fragile of ghostly objects to appear or disappear.
She also explains that many buildings in Salem have been consecrated, meaning it's been declared sacred or holy ground by a religious figure, and therefore ghosts cannot pass through them unless there's a door or window open. There are also remnants of the old world scattered throughout Salem, so inversely there are some obstacles that Ronan can see and can't pass through, but living people can. She explains that there are demons in the world who were once like Ronan, who are now stuck in the world and have lost themselves entirely, staying only to try and consume those caught in between. Abigail runs off, and Ronan returns to his body, now made into a crime scene as the cops begin investigating.
Seeing your own body lying on the street. It's like looking in a mirror you don't want to see but can't turn away from. And that's when you realize you no longer know which one's real and which is the reflection.
Baxter begins mocking Ronan when Rex steps in, and Rex vows to find Ronan's killer.
Backup? Who needs backup? You shouldn't have tried to be one of us. Man, you were one dumb son of a bitch. Sir?
Hey, Baxter, hey! Just get back to taking them statements. Come on.
Ronan begins investigating on his own and learns of his power to possess people to read their minds, influence their thoughts, and see through their eyes to get a look at the evidence. Ronan eventually gets his chance to get inside the building so that he can head to the top floor where he was killed. During this time, there's a lot of exploring to do within the apartments, and some mini side cases that you can help resolve. On his way up the stairs, Ronan encounters these screaming demons who will attempt to tear him apart and destroy his existence, and they appear regularly throughout the game. He also encounters Abigail creating notes all over the walls, but she disappears, telling him those notes aren't for you. Ronan finds his way to the top floor and begins looking through evidence of why the Bell Killer was there in the first place. Seemingly, the killer was looking for a medium named Cassandra, who had been assisting the police in the Bell Killer investigations. While there is no trace of Cassandra, Ronan discovers that in interrupting the killer, he allowed a young girl, the medium's daughter, to escape.
Turn around. You're under arrest.
Looking through the evidence, Ronan sees a vision of the girl at the local church and heads there to see if he can find her. During this time, you can wander somewhat freely around the city of Salem, possess whoever you see, find collectibles, and there are 3 other side cases that you can solve. We'll dive into these once we wrap the main story up. After arriving in the church and with the help of possessing a cat, Ronan finds himself in the attic and finds the young girl from the apartment. After trying to possess her, Ronan is powered out and realizes she can see him.
Out! God damn it if you ever possess me again! You have no right to dump your unfinished business on me.
Now, I'm tracking down my killer, okay? Someone who was seconds away from attacking you about an hour ago, and if... Wait a minute. You can see me? And hear me?
Joy, like her mother Cassandra, also has medium-like abilities and thus can see and communicate with the dead. Joy has no idea where her mother is and was in the apartment looking for her. Her mother keeps a book which she's been using in an attempt to profile the Bell Killer, and when Joy finds out it's most likely at the police station, she bolts. When Ronan attempts to follow her, she lets out a powerful scream, knocking him back.
Leave me alone!
But with the help of the cat, we find our way out of the church and head to the station.
Strange coming back here now, like this. A place I used as a crutch to get through the tough times when I found myself suddenly alone again. Funny how history repeats itself.
Ronan is the first one at the station and walks into the Bell Killer war room and checks if any new leads have been found since his death. He finds out that Joy has been arrested for trying to sneak into the station and is being held in interrogation and heads to confront her. He deducts that Cassandra was working with Baxter, but needs Joy's help to physically look through the things, so he possesses cameras and items around the office to distract guards, allowing Joy to sneak through. Inside Baxter's office, they find the book, and outside the station, Joy agrees to help Ronan throughout the rest of his investigation. The book's first clue takes them to the city cemetery, where Ronan finds evidence that a recent murder at the cemetery was most likely a Bell Killer victim. A young ghost girl appears, and when Ronan attempts to talk to her, she takes off, leaving him to chase. We have a long section where Ronan learns some new abilities and encounters more demons, while also discovering a long and twisted history of the gravesite.
I heard them say it was some kind of field hospital or something. Please, get me out of here. It's not what they say it is. Not with him here.
Ronan finally catches up with the girl, Sophia, and by holding on to her, he sees visions of her murder.
I don't know about any contract. Please, just stop.
The hell is this? Contract? What did he mean by contract? No. This is the memory of your murder. You're too young. You shouldn't see this.
The Bell Killer kept asking Sophia about a contract and eventually tied her to a chair and drowned her. Ronan meets up with Joy, and they find evidence in the book that implies that one of the Bell Killer's victims survived and is currently being held in a mental facility.
Of course it is. Okay, ready to go?
The pair sneak their way into the hospital and find Iris, scribbling messages and drawings all over the walls. It turns out, Iris can see Ronan and has medium-like powers such as Joy and Cassandra. And she wasn't alone when the Bell Killer took her, but was with her twin sister, Rose. Rose helped Iris escape as the Bell Killer attempted to burn them at the stake, and the reason Iris has been drawing images all over the wall is because Rose is currently possessing her.
It's Rose.
She has flames.
She was possessed.
I told you to stay back! Who are you? I'm Joy. You don't belong in this place.
Orderlies.
Crap, I'm so dead!
All right, Iris could be the answer to everything. Help her, help her. Come on, she's coming with us.
No! You're not taking her!
You want the orderlies to shock her? She stays here. You want her to be safe outside? She comes with us. It's up to you.
They agree to let Ronan and Joy help them escape the hospital, and Iris tells Ronan that the killer wanted them to admit that they had a contract with demons.
So he just asked you if you knew about a contract?
He didn't ask. He wanted us to admit to it. Admit to having a contract with demons.
Joy takes Iris to the church, and Ronan heads to the museum, which just happens to be about the Salem witch trials, hoping to find a common connection between the killer and his methods. Ronan makes the connection that the methods of execution the Bell Killer has been using are exactly like how the witches were executed in the late 1600s. Joy joins Ronan, and they head upstairs and realize the connection is that the killer is targeting mediums and those who can see otherworldly spirits. They also find proof that Baxter had been at the museum and hid evidence, and they start to believe that he is the killer. Ronan decides to head to Baxter's apartment to see if he can find more evidence of him being involved, and tells Joy to head to the church as she is still wanted by police and shouldn't be seen wandering around. As Ronan exits the museum, he hears police cars going off in the direction of the church and arrives to find dozens of cops posted out front. Joy gets arrested for attempting to trespass on the crime scene, and Ronan overhears Rex and another cop, Stewart, mention that no one has heard from Baxter since he was seen earlier, and that he's not at the station or his apartment.
Hey, anybody find Baxter yet?
Nope. To the station, drove by his place, nothing. There's definitely something wrong here.
We find out that the Bell Killer has indeed been to the church, killing innocent bystanders at a wedding party and the priest, all in an effort to ultimately finish what he had started and kill Iris.
Let me go! Let me go! He's here!
Look, you need to back off.
Iris and Rose are reunited and both fade off into the light, with Iris telling Ronan,
"Just remember, this wasn't your fault."
I'm sorry.
In the church, Ronan finds a key that leads him to an old judgment house, a place where they used to sentence witches to death. Outside the church, Joy is arrested and taken away by Rex.
I always heard this place was such an interesting museum back in its heyday. Now it's just a place propped up by rusty nails and rumors. A place you wouldn't dare your worst enemy to go into.
Huh. Maybe this abandoned place isn't so abandoned after all.
I hate it when I'm right.
Ronan heads into the old abandoned judgment house, seeing a light on in one of the rooms and a cop car parked out in front. Inside the lighted room, Ronan finds the Bell Killer's war room, maps of locations of where he's killed, articles of his killings, and photos of his victims. However, the victims are decades apart, making it nearly impossible for one person to be behind this whole thing. Ronan makes his way to the basement and finds none other than Baxter, dead on the floor.
I should have been the one that stopped you.
Ronan? What the hell is going on?
You sick bastard. Why'd you do it? Why'd you bring back the witch trials and kill all those innocent girls?
You think I'm the Bell Killer? Are you insane? I've never killed anyone.
Ghost Baxter approaches Ronan, and while Ronan accuses him of being the Bell Killer, Baxter denies this. Baxter was supposed to drop the case, but him and Joy's mom, Cassandra, continued to pursue it. Before he was killed, the Bell Killer told him that his instrument of death will kill again. Baxter also says Cassandra is alive and well in a safe house outside the city. Ronan tells Baxter to go get Cassandra and bring her back to the station while he checks out the rest of the basement's cellar. In the cellar, Ronan discovers that Abigail, the ghost girl from the very beginning of the game, lived during the time of the witch trials. She was one of the first people to accuse others of being witches, which led to the deaths of innocent people and the imprisonment of many more. After the government had put a stop to the witch trials, Abigail's hate for them remained, and people feared what she might do if she was released from prison, and so she was ordered to be killed. Before she was taken away, she vowed to personally kill every witch in Salem, even if it takes her till the end of eternity. As Ronan prepares to leave the cellar, he overhears Baxter's radio that Rex and Joy have not returned to the station, and he deducts that they must be at the museum. He shows up just in time to find Rex, possessed by Abigail, about to hang Joy. 2 cops attempt to intervene, but Abigail possesses and kills them before they get a chance.
Abigail, stop!
Ronan runs up to Joy and possesses her in order to get her to scream like she did earlier in the elevator, forcing Abigail out of Rex.
It's over, Abigail.
He then grabs onto Abigail and is taken back to her own execution 300 years ago. Abigail in turn reveals that she used Rex's body to kill Ronan, and that she used different bodies for different murders. Baxter was the one who initially killed Rose and attempted to kill Iris, though we don't know for sure if it was his body used to kill Iris at the church. Abigail reveals that she killed Baxter because she eventually kills all the bodies she uses, and it's here we find out that Ronan's body was used to drown Sophia.
No. I wouldn't. No. I wouldn't. How could I? You made me kill her.
Abigail was targeting mediums because of their similarities to witches. Abigail then summons the demon hands from the floor and attempts to grab Ronan, but instead is dragged down herself, disappearing forever. Joy is okay, and it's mentioned that she doesn't press any charges against Rex, although it isn't mentioned if Rex ever finds out what actually happens. Joy is reunited with her mom, Ronan is reunited with Julia, and the Bell Killer streak finally comes to an end.
Ronan?
The story is alright. It's good. It's okay. Okay, you know the whole suspense is finding out who the killer is at the end. And it's not terribly hard to guess that we're all supposed to think it's Baxter, and then it turns out to be Rex, even though it's technically both, and yet technically neither. The game is roughly 6 hours long, and there's 5 characters in it that aren't Ronan and Joy. You have Rex, Baxter, Stewart, Father Macaulay, and Abigail. And in the end, the killer is somewhat predictable because it's the evil ghost girl from the beginning of the game. But you don't ever interact with her except for the beginning of the game and one scene where she's drawing on the walls. I think more interaction with her throughout the game, maybe having her guide you as an ally, would have made this more meaningful. There's probably a really good chance that most players didn't remember her by name by the time she showed up at the end. The big plot twist of the game is really that Ronan was one of the bodies used to act on the Bell Killer's killings, which is why he was killed. Or so Abigail says. Except he wasn't targeted. Abigail was looking for Cassandra, or Joy, or both, and Ronan just happened to have interrupted. It's also mentioned at the end that the case went unsolved forever and that Joy didn't report Rex for anything that he did under Abigail's control. But Baxter and Ronan were still 2 cops that were killed by the Bell Killer in the same night, so it's not like the investigation would have just suddenly stopped. Rex would still have been in charge, and whether or not Joy tells him what happened, he still has to keep searching for the killer, or at least pretend to search for the killer, and all the physical evidence so far leads back to Baxter, Ronan, and himself. There's a world out there where Rex dies feeling like he failed his team because he never solved the crimes that killed 2 of his men. I think one of the biggest things the story suffers from is the fact that it all takes place in one night. Supposedly, Ronan was killed, and then sometime after that, Iris and the wedding party are killed, and sometime before or during or after that, Baxter is killed, but with whose body we don't know. We can assume the body wasn't Rex's because Baxter probably would have recognized his voice, meaning there's another body still out there somewhere. Abigail also said she chose Rex because he was a feared and respected official in town, but I don't really see why that matters, as no one saw their killer's face. Presumably, Abigail would be very aware that some of her victims could come back as ghosts, and so she had the killer's faces covered just in case. Speaking of victims coming back as ghosts, can we just talk about Ronan and his comprehension of ghost life for a second? It takes him less than 10 minutes to understand the fact that he can walk through walls, teleport around, see visions of the past. He even understands that he can possess people and make them see certain things to influence their actions, and that no matter what, he'll always have a magical ghost cigarette with him. Despite this, at the very end of the game, he still tries to talk the cops down into not confronting Rex when they can't see him, and he still calls Rex a piece of shit after already acknowledging that it's Abigail controlling him.
Rex, you piece of shit. What are you doing?
One of the prominent storylines of the game should be the relationship between Ronan and Joy. She's your only connection to the physical world, and so she needs to help you out. Except there's only a few parts where you actually do things with her. You break her out of the interrogation room, you break her into the mental hospital, and then you search for evidence in the museum. There are many cutscene conversations between the two, but there could have been some really cool ideas involving solving crimes and only the medium can see you. A year before Murdered Soul Suspect came out, The Last of Us and BioShock Infinite came out. These both set an extremely high bar for games that feature a father and daughter type relationship, or basically an older male and younger female duo. One of the biggest factors is that BioShock Infinite is double the length of Murdered Soul Suspect, and The Last of Us is triple the length. These games are popular because the story relationship between the two characters is very strong, but there are gameplay mechanics that help support the relationship. I found myself wishing I could spend more time with Joy or doing more things, but rather she's kind of just there, and someone you have to look out for while you're on your way. She kind of just acts like a puppet for Ronan's physical needs, which aren't many, rather than bringing something unique to the table. For example, when going through the cemetery and avoiding demons, it could have been really cool if Joy went with you and used her mega powerful scream to stun them so you could get away. Instead, we see the scream twice. It didn't give me the, aha, of course that's the answer when it happened. It was rather, oh, sure, I completely forgot that she did the scream, but I guess that works. Another thing is just how much exposition there is. I feel like as a detective, you want to discover things and learn as you go, but here it's more like you collect the clues, choose which ones are relevant, and then let Ronan fill in the blanks for you. I can't help but think of a game like LA Noire where you can actually start to make sense of the clues as you collect them, but here it's just collect the clues so Ronan can come to a conclusion. In the beginning of the game, you get a huge story dump about Ronan, his past, his wife dying. There's so much information all at once, and I don't particularly mind starting off with Ronan's death, but it's hard to get invested when there's so much important information that they want you to remember that was just played in a 3-minute movie. Ronan finds Julia again, but we only just learned of her existence and death a few moments ago, so it's not particularly an emotional moment like it should be. Likewise, it's hard to feel genuine hatred for Baxter because all we've heard about Ronan is that he was a criminal who had his past covered up because of family connections. This goes back to the length of the game being a huge hindrance in terms of story. I know I keep bringing it up, but if these things had time to develop, they could have been much more effective. Now that I brought up LA Noire, a game that has multiple cases, you might be thinking, well wait, didn't you mention there were some side cases earlier? And yes I did, but there are only 4, and each take less than 3 minutes to complete. If you were hoping for Oblivion side quest status, well unfortunately you've come to the wrong place. In the apartment, a young girl was killed and needs help finding her body, and all the clues you need are in the room right next to her. There's a girl on the beach who drowned, and you discover that she died trying to save passengers from a sinking ship many years ago. There's a girl who committed suicide watching a couple out together, wondering if the guy had cheated on her or not, and it turns out they met after the fact. And there's a crashed car where you help a guilty ghost realize that he was in fact not the drunk driver that killed him and his friends. In my opinion, something like this should have been the main focus of the game, helping ghosts resolve their murders and problems and freeing their souls. The fact that you have this decently sized open world and there are only 4 cases to stumble upon, none of which are very interesting, just makes me wish they had more time to work on this game and really flesh out this idea. When I played through again to get footage for this video, I actually googled side cases because I was sure that I had probably missed many, and it turns out there was only 4. I guess this is a good time to talk about the characters themselves. Ronan, Joy, Rex, Baxter, and Abigail, since they're pretty much the only prominent characters. Ronan is your typical badass, I don't follow the rules cop. Former criminal past, questionable methods, heartbreak, and covered in tattoos. He's no stranger to making enemies, as evidenced by his relationship with Baxter, and even Rex doesn't have many nice things to say about him. But he's definitely the kind of guy that knows he's an asshole, and he just goes with it. One thing I love about Ronan is his tattoos. Maybe not necessarily how they look, but I love how they all tell a story. But I would have loved to see if they'd turn the tattoos into some sort of story mechanic. At the beginning, we see how they tell the story of his life, appearing all over his bodies, and it would have been really cool to see them do something similar but in the afterlife, changing all over his body and maybe giving him clues and hints as to what to do next. They put so much emphasis on it at the beginning and then kind of just forgot about it. Ronan is voiced by actor Jason Brooks, and I must say, he actually does a really good job, and I was a bit shocked to find out that this is the only video game he's ever done, and I hope that changes soon if he's up to it. Ronan narrates the scene that you're in every time you go into a new location, and yeah, it's kinda cheesy, but I love it. It was done in such a way where it doesn't really take you out of the moment when it happens, and it just works.
When you're running away, you need a sanctuary. A place where nothing bad can touch you. But you can never escape the questions. They follow you everywhere.
Ronan's tough and cocky, but he's not too tough to the point where you aren't rooting for him. You want him to succeed and to be free, but due to the circumstances of the game, the threat of not seeing Julie again just doesn't really feel like much. He seems to be a genuine good guy when he helps out others, but we don't see enough of that for me to call him a completely righteous fellow, so I'll say he's down the middle. Joy is your typical tough teenage girl who breaks the rules and does whatever she wants. Her main goal is to find her mom, but throughout the entire game, she's reluctant to help Ronan. Even the one time she sneaks off to join Ronan at the museum, her main focus is still just finding her mom. The bond you keep hoping to form between her and Ronan never really happens. They become friends, but of course we don't really get to see the resolution of their story, because as soon as Ronan saves her, the story cuts away, and the last scene we see is with her and her mom. I would have enjoyed Joy a lot more had she been there throughout the entire game, and we could learn a little bit more about her, such as why her dad's not in the picture, why didn't she live at home with her mom in the first place. It feels like Ronan opens up to her, but she never really reciprocates, and the game makes excuses for her a lot to just leave at random points. She's certainly not annoying or intrusive, but I wish there was more non-cutscene interaction with her. Rex seems to change his personality almost every time you see him. He's heartbroken but rough and stern, and then sometimes he's calm and maybe a little bit submissive, and then sometimes he's just an outright jerk. You don't really interact with him that much, so the plot twist of you thought it was Baxter but it was Rex doesn't feel all that gut-punching because we never really got to know Rex or think he was on our side. We know Ronan and Rex's prior relationship was rocky at best, but he cares enough to put that aside and make his number one priority finding and stopping the Bell Killer. I really think what was missing here was a final scene where Ronan talks to Rex through Joy so they can have that one final moment of forgiveness for each other before Ronan goes and joins Julia.
I'm sorry, Julia. I got some bad news.
Don't worry, bro. She already knows.
Baxter is intentionally stupid. He literally tampers with evidence when you first see him, and immediately we hear him saying that Ronan had it coming. He's supposed to seem heartless and cruel because of his rivalry with Ronan, but it's so over the top for a cop. We later find out that he was demoted but kept working on the Bell Killer case anyways because they felt they were so close to solving it, which speaks to his true character. Truthfully, besides the exaggerated moments where he's made to seem unlikable, Baxter is honestly in the right with a lot of what he does. Ronan had a criminal record that was hidden by family. Baxter knew a cover-up was happening and was demoted when he spoke up about it. It was him and Cassandra's work that laid out the entire foundation for Joy and Ronan, and in the end, what he cared about most was making sure the Bell Killer was caught. Abigail is revealed to be the main antagonist, but as I said before, we have such little interaction with her, it feels a little bit empty. As I also said before, having her act as an ally in helping Ronan learn his new abilities could have gone a long way. I know that would technically go against her motivations, but does she not help him when they meet in the first place? Abigail Williams is actually based off of a real person from the witch trials who started accusing people of witchcraft when she was just 12 years old. After the trials ended, however, she disappeared from all historical records, so we don't really know what happened. In this story, she was killed and believes mediums are witch-like, and so she has them killed. The final confrontation feels a bit weak. You basically get a cutscene of what you already know. She drops the big truth bomb on you, and then just like that, she's out of there and the game's over. At this point, we've only seen her kill other humans, and while Ronan obviously wants to save Joy and Rex, I think it would have been a bit more effective to see her maybe kill some other ghosts as well. We've seen plenty of ghosts that died hundreds of years ago, like the ghost from the beach, who haven't turned to demons, and they seem to be doing just fine. We also avoided the hands from the ground plenty of times throughout, so it's not particularly threatening to see the same thing we've already seen throughout the entire game and have easily avoided. But the anticlimactic ending could be more pointed towards gameplay than the story. The big twist is there, but how you get to that point is just lacking a little bit. So let's go over literally every gameplay mechanic so we can just see how we got to this point. The very first mechanic we're introduced to is Ronan trying to line up into his own body. Because this is literally the first thing you do, I thought, oh okay, well maybe this could be used in a bunch of different ways. It's not particularly hard, but maybe it would be cool if you could have the power to control any corpse or person, maybe giving you a way to interact with the physical world. But no, this is literally the only time this mechanic is used in the entire game. Now, I'm not a game creator, but I'm not sure I understand why the very first thing you decide to showcase as gameplay is gameplay that will literally never be seen again. As I said, the mechanic doesn't do much. It's simple and it's just meant to make the experience slightly more interactive, but it would have been nice to see it more than once. I know exploration and traveling aren't really mechanics, but it's worth noting how it works here. Basically, you have walls and buildings that you can walk through and can't walk through. Buildings that have been declared sacred ground, you can't walk through, but oftentimes you can't tell until you're right up against it, trying to walk through it awkwardly and smashing your face against the wall. There are also some old relics and buildings from the past that inhibit your way, so the game appears to let you have free roam of the city, but you're actually pretty limited as to where you can go. However, if a wall hasn't been blessed, you can feel free to walk right through that thing, and it actually feels pretty cool. It's also a bit annoying because the game is pretty linear, so you're always being forced into a certain direction based off of these supposedly random ghostly objects appearing in your way. When you actually get free roam of an area and you're walking through walls, it's honestly pretty neat. It certainly makes you feel like a ghost. Unfortunately, outside of the apartment building and the mental hospital, most other indoor locations have a ton of ghost walls and obstacles preventing you from running around in them. You also have the City of Salem itself. It shows a lot of promise at first when you realize you're playing a detective game, but instead of being riddled with side cases and things to explore, you have 4 very short side cases that we've already covered, and just a bunch of collectibles to get. You can possess people and hear their thoughts, but at a certain point you realize you're just hearing the same dialogue over and over again. Suddenly this open area, which should have things to discover, just becomes a big empty husk that you have to walk through to get from story point to story point. And yes, I mentioned collectibles. Every main area has collectibles. Once you collect them, you get treated to basically a little ghost story. It's just one image slowly zooming in and out while you hear a voice narrate a 3 to 4 minute ghost story. It's honestly not worth the effort of checking every corner and going back and forth between the same locations you've already been to just to find them. They don't add to the story or plot whatsoever, and they're just there to fill up your time. If you see it, pick it up, but I wouldn't go hunting for them. There are other collectibles that you can find throughout the entire game, which basically give you more of the story. Julia and Ronan's relationship, Baxter's history prior to the game, the investigation on Bell Killer suspects. It's nothing that you necessarily need to understand or appreciate the game more. It basically just expands upon the cutscene from the very beginning of the game.
Why can every friggin' ghost teleport but me? I'm gonna have to figure this shit out.
During the cemetery level, Ronan gains the ability to teleport small distances. You can see it used a couple times, like crossing a river to gather a collectible or something, and there's a few parts in the cemetery where you have to use it, but after that, it literally never becomes mandatory to use. If there was more gameplay that required speed or precise movement, I think it would have been really cool, but unfortunately there's never really a great place to use it besides traveling around Salem faster. Now, I also mentioned that while exploring you can possess people, and this is a pretty common feature throughout the game, but surprisingly very little comes out of it. As far as I'm aware, basically every human you see can be possessed, in which you're given 4 options: influence, eavesdrop, peek, and mind read, although many of those are grayed out if they don't apply. Mind read is your most standard option. Basically every character will have 2 random sentences they can think of, and while 99% of the time it's pretty useless information, it can be fun just to possess everyone that you see and see what they're thinking. This is another issue with the exploration, as more or less most of the people you end up possessing are all thinking the same thing. Peeking is used to look through someone's eyes when they're doing something. If they're looking at a notepad or a computer, it can be used to get more information. Although to my memory, I can only recall 2 instances where this was actually done. Eavesdropping is used when possessing a character that's having a conversation with another character. This one makes the least amount of sense to me because you could in theory just stand there and also hear what was being said. The 2 times I remember this being done, one was in an outdoor public conversation, which once again, you could just stand there and listen, and the other was when Rex was on the phone, which I guess makes more sense, but you could also in theory just stand close enough and hear them both. The last option you have is to influence someone, which is basically choosing something for them to think about and hoping that causes the reaction you want. Like, hey, remember the photo? And then the guy will be like, oh yeah, I remember the photo. I remember it. Let's look at it. Let's look at that photo right now. And stop me if you've heard me say this already, but I can only remember maybe 2 or 3 times where you actually use this.
Real witches didn't have those hats.
My main problem is that you hardly interact with the people you possess. Sometimes you just possess them to walk over certain areas, and overall it just feels like they made people possessable for the sake of doing it. I know that taking control of someone physically would have made the game drastically different, but as it is right now, I found myself possessing everyone hoping for something interesting, when in reality you could probably get away with just possessing like 4 people for the entire game.
Keep cool, big boy. Next hand, you take her down.
But how do the crime scenes work? Well, every once in a while, Ronan will be forced to stop and examine all the evidence laid out before him, and almost always it takes place at an already processed crime scene with other cops in the area, and you're really just taking a look for yourself. It's really just going around, pressing X until you've collected all the hints, and then you can answer whatever question is being asked by selecting evidence on the screen. At the bottom, you'll see 3 shields there, and if you mess up once, a shield goes away. You mess up 3 times, absolutely nothing happens. There is no punishment whatsoever for getting anything wrong, so you might as well just choose all the options until you get the right answer. Sometimes you think you have the right answer because it's a bit subjective, but hey, if you don't, no problem. There's no punishment for getting it wrong. I don't want to make the comparison because the games are on completely different levels, but I can't help but go back to how LA Noire did it, and 3 years earlier at that. And you can actually get cases wrong in that game. Here everything is revealed all in due time. It's a bit too linear in that sense for a detective game. You're not really feeling the suspense of what will happen next because no matter what you do, you'll get there. But that's also a part of the bigger problem here, which, as we said, and I've said multiple times throughout this video, was how short the game was. The other thing Ronan does is sees flashes or visions of the past, and it just flashes a bunch of words and you have to pick the right ones. Once again, there's no punishment for getting any of this wrong, so you can just feel free to try everyone until you get it right. It just feels weird. It gives you like words, 2 of which are clearly not correct, and you just select it. Instead of letting you figure it out on your own, it literally shoves the answer in your face. Another ghostly power Ronan has is the ability to poltergeist items in order to distract people, whether it be coffee machines, radios, or televisions. This is used strictly as a way to get Joy into places where she shouldn't be, and I'm a little confused as to why it's in there at all from a story purpose. Abigail at the beginning of the game told us that our strengths become powers in the afterlife. So why does Ronan have the power to manipulate electronic devices? Or is this something that all ghosts can do? And if so, why don't we see more ghosts doing it? Or more ghosts in general? Well, actually, there are a ton of ghosts in the form of demons, and oh boy, are the demons problematic. In certain parts of the game, demons will attempt to go after Ronan. If they get close to him for too long, they'll suck his soul out. Placed throughout the levels, there are numerous hiding spots for Ronan to zap into. However, the demons will gradually check these spots, so you'll have to go back and forth between them. Eventually the demon will go back to where it was originally, and the only way to destroy it is to sneak up behind them and execute them by pressing whatever random combination is prompted. Ronan also gains the ability to see through walls so we can better see where the demons are. But here's the catch. The demons are really just there to slow you down. You don't have to kill them, and you don't get anything if you do kill them. They're literally just there. They manage to both be the only real source of challenging gameplay in the game, as well as take you completely out of the moment of whatever it is you were doing. It becomes more annoying in some ways because the mechanics don't really balance out. There is no sneak feature, so you have to walk up behind them slowly and just hope that they won't randomly turn around and spot you, starting a 4-minute game of hide and seek as you go between hiding spots over and over and over again. Sometimes they give you all the time in the world to kill them, and sometimes they turn around the second you walk out of hiding, and then you know it's going to be another solid minute before they all reset and you can try again. Appropriately enough, just as there's no reward for killing them, there's no punishment for dying to them, just a reset, so if you've killed some, you'll have to do it again. Or like I said, just walk right by. I'm actually not sure if any of them are mandatory, which probably isn't good if they're the main threat of the game. Besides demons, you also have lost souls, which are basically little patches on the ground with hands sticking out that you can't walk over unless you're possessing someone. It's really not much of anything. It's just another way the game forces you into a certain direction, and it's very easily avoidable. However, these are the only 2 ways you can really lose the game. I've seen forums of people asking how to disable the demons because it ruins the pacing of the game, but doing that literally takes away any challenge. I feel like the demons were probably meant to be much more prevalent in the game. There are hiding spots all over Salem, but they're never actually used. When I first played the game, I assumed that at the very end there would be a long chase scene that would take you throughout the entire city, but instead the hiding spot's main purpose is really just to help you get around the city faster. All of this, of course, leads to the final scene of the game. What might be more of a disappointing final boss fight than even the legendary Marauder Shields himself, which is a completely different debate that we're not getting into right now. The main mechanic used in the final sequence is a timer. Now you might be thinking, well that's odd, you haven't mentioned any time trials or anything before. That's because it's nowhere else in the game, but out of nowhere comes a tiny little timer that starts counting down from 20, and you have to use that time to reach Joy before she's hung. However, that only takes about 5 seconds, and then you possess her, then you have to select something for Joy to think of that will make Abigail stop. The only thing even remotely correct is the powerful scream. Also, something to note is that while you're on this screen, the timer stops. You could spend 30 minutes on this screen if you wanted to. After that, you're given 8 seconds to figure out what to do next, which is walk up to Abigail and press X, and that's pretty much the game. What happens if the timer runs out, as it most likely will on your first attempt? Well, you start at the beginning of the level, which takes 3 seconds before the final cutscene. So once again, there's really no pressure. I guess these floor demons are supposed to feel threatening and hard to get around, but honestly it just makes me wish they had at least bothered to put the other demons in the level and made it so you have to kill them. At least then it would have some resemblance of gameplay for the final stage. If it weren't for all of the plot twists and revelations, the ending would fall completely flat, but even with it, it still kind of does. It feels rushed, like they didn't get to finish it properly. I'm not saying Murdered Soul Suspect needs to be an action game. I'm not even saying that it needs gameplay. A game like Life is Strange has very little gameplay. You walk around, chat with characters, little mechanics here and there with time travel. Sure, there are little things to do, but it's not extreme or intense. But I don't think Murdered Soul Suspect was meant to be that kind of game. Then you have LA Noire, where you can drive, investigate, interrogate, shoot, walk around. Yes, it's linear, but there are puzzles that need solving, things that need doing. Here in Murdered Soul Suspect, it feels so empty. You walk up to evidence, press X, guess whatever you want until you get it right, and ultimately just end up walking through the narrative. If that's what the game was meant to be, that's fine, but there's too much here for me to believe that. It feels like they were so close to having something great, but they just missed the mark. Now, I don't know the development history of this game. I don't know who wrote it, who worked on it, what time constraints they had, what kind of budget cuts they had to deal with. Maybe ideas got cut, maybe unfavorable ideas were put in. As I said, I'm not a game developer, so I won't insult or judge or even imply that I could do better, because I don't know the circumstances the game was made under, and I don't think that's taken into consideration enough. But let's say in a perfect world where I had unlimited time and unlimited resources and nobody to answer to, what would I have done differently? First off, as I've said 1,000 times in this video, I think a longer game would benefit everything. More time with Abigail, more side cases to solve, more time with Joy, and more situations where we actually get to use these possession powers. Abigail as an antagonist is fine, but as I said earlier, the plot twist doesn't quite hit its mark because there are only 5 major named characters. This is the kind of story where you know there's going to be a plot twist ending and it turns out you've known the killer the whole time, and I really don't mind the reveal, but we needed more context before we got there. More talking to Abigail, or interacting with Rex or Baxter, or more clues that actually give us information on what's happening. I don't mind the NPCs not being comparable to Oblivion's Radiant AI, sometimes they just need to stand there and look pretty, but some variation would have been a lot nicer. There are some ghosts throughout the game that you can't help but just interact with, and it's really neat. A dead guy in a bathtub, a creepy stalker. More of this would have just made the world feel less empty because you could actually talk to them, although this also goes back to the issue of having more side cases. This might be an unpopular suggestion, but I actually would have liked to have played as Ronan for a little bit when he was still alive. It's hard to feel the impact of being dead without being alive first. Give us a chance to work a case, maybe his wife's murder case from years prior. Give us a chance to open doors and pick up things and investigate evidence so that you can really feel the loss of those functions without it. I just feel like the exposition dump at the beginning was a little quick and it was not really a great way to get attached to the character. But what about from a gameplay perspective? Number one most important thing I would change is give more interaction with Joy. Sometimes she really just feels like she's there waiting for you until you're done so that she can move on. Giving her a mechanic based off of her being there and not just possessing her once to move across some stairs would have really made you feel her value and make you miss her in the levels where she's not around. A lot of people said the demons ruined the pacing of the game, but if they're there, let's just make them better. I think the demons need to be more threatening and maybe more personal. Don't make them avoidable, and have one specific demon chasing you down for the whole story. If Abigail can't really present herself as a final boss, then a secondary villain demon could have stepped into that role. The feeling of being chased by a demon, knowing they're searching and hunting you down, could be a truly terrifying thing, but these demons just slow down and disrupt the game rather than add to that experience. Allow Ronan to physically control people when he possesses them. I can see why maybe some people wouldn't agree with this because it changes up the game pretty drastically. Here's the thing, I don't mind the influence feature, I actually think it's pretty cool, but all the possession features are used so minimally. That should be a really cool part of the game, possessing people, reading their thoughts, knowing what they're doing. Instead it's like, oh, you're thinking of pizza. Great. Moving on. Lastly, I think a minigame or puzzle aspect or something to up the investigations would have been awesome. I hate to go back to LA Noire all the time, but it really did set quite a high standard for these detective games. I understand the studio wasn't nearly as big and probably had 1/10 of the resources, but just guessing and having unlimited tries until you figure it out really kinda lowers the stakes. The investigations feel a bit empty and there's no real mystery to them. To be completely honest, I'm hesitant to say I don't like Murdered Soul Suspect. Truly. I know I've just spent the past however many minutes kinda criticizing it, but it's because it feels like they were so close. Everything was right there, it just needed a little bit more. The game can be fun, it's got some really good moments in it, and I don't regret playing through it twice. It just leaves you wanting more. And sometimes that's the mark of a really good game, and sometimes that's the mark of a game that's so close to being good, and I think that's where this lies. If you enjoyed this game, by all means, continue to enjoy it. Don't let anything I've said convince you on why you shouldn't like it. It's simple, it's casual, you can finish it in one sitting. I just don't think that's what they wanted. They being the developers. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe you feel completely different about it, and that's okay. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you've played this game, what do you think? Do you agree? Disagree? All I ask is that you stay civil and respect everyone's opinions, but I'd love to know, what do you think about Murdered Soul Suspect? In the end, I just haven't really seen anything like Murdered Soul Suspect, but we also haven't seen a real successor to it yet. And I hope that one day someone can come back to this idea and, no pun intended, create a spiritual successor that allows the concept to live up to all of that potential. Because I really do like the game.
Death repays debts, my father always said. Forever I believe that. But truth be told, this life ain't over until you're honest about what you owe. Set everything right. Settle your debts. Only then can you move on.
Ronan?
What's up everybody, my name is GhostBoy259. Thank you for checking out this video. It was meant to be like 15 minutes long, it ended up being an hour of course. But I'd love to know what you guys think about the game. Do you think maybe I was too harsh on it because it is an indie game studio? Do you think I was off the mark? Do you think it's fine as it is? Let me know, be civil in the comments and we can have a conversation. Also a huge thanks to Raycevick for providing that troll voice at the very beginning, and happy belated birthday to him. He's not going to watch this video, so it doesn't really matter, but I'm going to say happy birthday anyways. You can follow me or the channel on Twitter, links are down at the description. You can also check out our gaming channel, JafferDubs. Sometimes I upload things that are related to this channel on that channel, so you can kind of get a sneak peek of what's coming next. And the next big video next month will actually not be made by me, but a friend of mine, but I'll do an intro in that kind of video. So, thank you so much, love you guys, see you soon.